In this week's Supercars Talk, I discussed that awful P word, parity. So far this year, the Mustangs had 6 starts and 6 wins, and that awful P word has come up again, parity. So, what is it? Basically, parity is this formula that is supposed to be a parity formula. So everyone has an equal chance of winning. Now, not all cars are created equal. So when we look back, and they'll keep telling us these current cars now are the most equal that they've ever been. So if we go back to the basics, so the actual the chassis of the car, the roll cage and what everything bolts onto, that's exactly the same for now the 3 makes that are running. And then you've got your 3 different engines, of course. It's the Holden, Ford and Nissan. Let's not get into things about Chevs and things like that. But when the Volvo engine came out, that engine was quite a lot lighter than the other engines. So now we have a minimum weight for all the engines. So you actually, if the engine's lighter in any way, it has to be ballasted within the engine to the same weight as the other ones. So essentially the engines are the same, and you've also got what they call a cumulative horsepower figure, I think they call it. So they don't have a cap of, say, 600 horsepower, you can only make that. What they do is, I think that the figure is about 20,000 horsepower, but it's taken at various points over the rev range. I think it's something like every 250 revs. They take a horsepower figure, and over that whole range, when you add up all those horsepower figures over the range, has to add up to 20,000 horsepower, say. Give or take, somewhere around there. So essentially, you could make a car that has a bit more top end power, but not as much low end, or a bit more middle, and a bit lower in the top and a bit lower in the low, or something like that. But over that whole curve, they all have to make the same amount of power. Now, obviously, there is some slight variances in there, but it does keep it quite equal. And most of the teams now seem to have kind of converged to the same kind of performance. So then the big difference in previous years has probably been the aero, but they're claiming now with the Mustang, the ZB Commodore and the Nissan Altima, that the aero has never been closer. So as we all know, the Mustang's all new for this year, but the Altima did have some aero adjustments over Christmas, so they're more in line with the ZB Commodore. Now, one little thing with this aero, I'm not sure, the Altima's wing end plates, which if you look on the photo, these bits here, the Commodore has quite large ones hanging off the back, and then the Mustang just came out with these barge boards on the back of the car, where the Nissan stayed quite slim. I'm not sure if that's something, the budgetary constraints for changing it, but I would have thought Nissan would have tried to make a change there. I don't think it impacts, say, straight line speed, but I think as the car kind of moves around the corner, the bigger end plates help stabilise it a bit. That's not the big issue at the moment. I think the big issue that everyone's talking about, the big issue that they are talking about is the centre of gravity. Now, centre of gravity we talk about, in a race car you want to keep the weight lower to the ground, because if you've got the weight up top, the car kind of rolls around a lot more, whereas if you have the weight down low, it keeps it a lot more stable. Now, these cars are I hope all of them are ballasted up to the minimum weight. They actually dropped the minimum weight this year by, I think it was 15 kilos, just because some of them were ballasting a lot more than others, and just to keep it more even. But currently your ballast, it has to be kept, there's limits, I think it's just around the driver, all the ballast has to be kept. Now, one of the things that's come up out of this, apparently the DJR cars, they're saying that they were in the same exhaust when they had the Falcon, but whether it's true or not, who knows. Now they made a muffler that was quite a lot heavier than a normal muffler. Nothing in the rules that says you can't do this, but that's a way of bringing that ballast down lower, because the muffler in that sits very low on the car. So an ingenious way, I suppose, of getting the car essentially a bit heavier, not having to put ballast around the driver as much, get that centre of gravity down real low. So you may ask, how come all of this has become a problem all of a sudden? Well, it was a bit of an issue at the start of last year when the ZB Commodore came out. In previous years, you had to run kind of as much original panels as you could. And say back, like with the Altima and the VF and, the FG Falcon, they'd kind of cut and shut roofs and things like that to make them fit. And there was something with the Holden's hatch and things like that they said, oh, we can't make the roof work like that, so can we do a composite panel? And Supercars said, yeah, that's fine. But no one, the Ford and Nissan teams claimed that no one told them this was happening, and it all became a big issue around Adelaide when Gisbergen went and dominated. So then there was this mad scramble before the Grand Prix where, the Nissan and Ford teams went and made composite roofs. I think it was just the roofs, to line it down, get some of the weight out of the top of the car. Results didn't change too much between rounds, and if you're there, apparently the Tickford, two of the cars got the composite roofs and two of them didn't, and couldn't really split the results between all the four cars over the weekend, and they never actually came out and said which two got the new roofs and which two didn't. I think one can be safe to say that Richie definitely didn't get the new roof, but out of the other three, you could question which one was the one who missed out. The results on track didn't show a big difference between the three cars. Now, I think why this is a bigger issue this year is the Mustangs, probably to fit it around the controlled chassis, they've had to go for kind of the previous cars have been more kind of, you just fitted the panels around the body, whereas I think the Mustang, because the dimensions are quite different, they've kind of been able to look at it as a pure kind of race car, and I think they've designed the panels a lot lighter. So if you took all the panels off a Commodore, an Altima and a Mustang and weighed them all, I think you find that the Mustang panels weigh a lot less than the Commodore panels, and the Altima, if anyone's still worried about them being competitive. So what they're saying is that you've just got an inherent advantage with the Mustangs because the panels are so much lighter to start with, so you can add more ballast, and teams like DJR have been able to run heavy mufflers to make up the weight. So this week the governing body went and did some tests on, I think it was 10 different cars at the Kelly Racing facility. So they tested, there was a car there from the Kellys obviously, Walkinshaw, Triple Eight, I think Gary Rogers, Erebus, Tickford and DJR Team Penske. And basically they were testing the centre of gravity on each of the cars. We haven't seen any results from this yet, and it'd be interesting to see and whether they tested, say, two cars from each team or something like that, and whether we see the difference between, say, two of the cars from Tickford, or if the two cars from DJR were tested, because I'd be inclined. Scott McLaughlin's is a brand new Mustang, while Fabian's is a converted Falcon, and whether there's any difference between those two could also answer some arguments on whether there's a Kelly crate or a Tickford tank in the field. as many people have suggested over the years, that the fourth car from both of those teams doesn't seem to get the same results as the rest of the cars. Although, going off Richie's results this year, I think there's a bit of proof there that maybe the driver was lacking in the fourth Tickford car last year. So it'll be interesting to see what the results are of this test and whether anything gets adjusted. Tickford have come out and said that they're preparing for Simmons Plains as though nothing's going to change, so they're nice and confident about it. I think some of the other Holden teams, they're hanging for something to change. I could get into a big debate about what's happened over the years. You know, the Ford guys will complain about when Holden got a free kick in '94 and got their rear wing adjusted just before Bathurst, or you know, the Holden guys will complain then in '96 where the under trays got cut, or you know, the Falcon under trays got cut in '95, or you know, this happened at this point. You know, it's happened all the way through. It's a long argument, that one, and I think there's been enough back and forth from both sides that it's all ended up pretty equal. I think in this case, everyone's saying kind of, oh, well, Tickford was nowhere last year and all of a sudden this year they're winning. Well, you know, it's hard to say that they were nowhere last year. Essentially they were the third best team after Dick Johnson and then Triple Eight last year. They were consistently, them and Erebus were the third best team. So they weren't that bad last year, and I have heard that they were still using single springs at points last year. They were one of the last teams to adopt these twin springs, which could actually account for some of them getting lost at points last year. So if you look at it that way and go, well, you know, we've changed to this single spring rear suspension, and you'd kind of expect that DJR with Ludo Lacroix there, they'd be on top of this kind of move straight away. And on the flip side, Triple Eight they were probably the most advanced with the twin spring setup, so they had the most to lose with this change to the single spring. So if you look at it and go, well, maybe Tickford have made a bit of a jump in the field with the change in the springs. We expected DJR to always be at the front. Maybe Triple Eight are just taking a little bit longer to, kind of get on top of this change. And all of a sudden that kind of changes everything around. And you kind of go, well, maybe Erebus has, stayed kind of where they were while the other two teams have lifted a little bit. And now you've got, just because Triple Eight and Erebus are, a bit behind the eight ball, all of a sudden it makes the Mustangs look a lot better than the Commodores. I could be talking out of my arse, and there could be a definite advantage in the Mustang. But I think over the year we'll probably find that it'll end up being more that, Penske's doing a really good job, and the fact that maybe the others have dropped the ball a bit, I don't expect Triple Eight to be behind the eight ball for much more of the season. So that's a bit of a rundown of the parity debate. I've been blabbering on for a long time. If there's anything more you want me to cover, just drop me a line down in the comments, and I'll try and answer your questions. I'm sure this parity debate will come up more during the season. I definitely don't think this is the end of it. So until next time, I'll see you later.
Put away your inhibitions, let the beast in you just get loose. We all young, wild and